Namaste, everyone. Can you hear me? Are we live? Om Sarva Mangala Mangalye Shive Sarva Shadike Sharnatrambike Gauri Narayani Namostute Chisti Stiti Finashanam Shakti Bhute Sanatani Gunashrai Gunemai Narayani Namostute Sharnagata Dinarta Paritrana Parayane Sarvasharti Hare Devi Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute. Om peace, peace, peace. So with those verses from the Chandi here on Kali Puja Day, we all meet for Satsang on Saturday morning. And I hope you've come with some questions about divine reality, either in the appreciation of it or in the seeking of it. That allows us all to be able to plumb the depths of something that's usually considered obscured or covered up by Maya. And so we have to exert consciously in order to penetrate through that covering power. We heard that from Sri Ramakrishna that in this world and in the day and age we're in, that avidya shakti, that is the power of ignorance, is thicker and denser than vidya shakti, the power of wisdom or revelation. So that's a pretty stern warning for us and should give us a clue as to how to keep our minds focused on divine reality, always trying to see through the appearances of things, as the yogis are trying to do, and live in a state of divine grace with those very few options in front of us, either a dharmic life or a divine life or a life of transcendental awareness like Sri Ramakrishna was in most of the time, called nirvikalpa samadhi. So with those words here on the morning of Kali Puja, I invite you all to think of some questions deep down within you, in your hearts and minds, that has to do with various subjects that you're studying, and maybe even just some general insights or sharing of experiences that you'd like to do here on this auspicious day. Next week, Saturday, a week from today, we have Jagadatri Puja. And of course, Jagadatri was the Divine Mother aspect that Holy Mother's family worshipped. And so that will bring an end to this beautiful month and a half of Divine Mother holy days that we went through with the 9 days and 9 nights of Sri Durga. And now we'll be culminating with Kali Puja and with Jagadatri Puja next week. Tonight, all of us here in Hawaii are going to meditate together from 11 to midnight. And those of us that can meet up here where we are at Badranath or meditate in place in their own homes, their own shrines, we'll all get together and do an hour's meditation at up until midnight to see the Kali Puja to the end of the 24-hour period. So if you want to join us where you are, it's probably going to be very early in the morning for many of you. If you're on the mainland, that's why I called the meditation just basically in Hawaii. But that being the case, all of us can be together in one mind, in one heart, one soul. And that will be an excellent opportunity to plumb the depths of the Divine Mother of the universe in this august form of Mother Kali, which Sri Ramakrishna worshipped all his life. So you can think about us engaging in that up until midnight tonight, and then moving on towards next week's Jagadhatri Puja to culminate all of these wonderful Holy Mother days in the season of October, November. So I'm glad to see many of you gathered here, and I'll open up the forum then to these questions that may be percolating or can be drawn up from deep inside. And then we can engage in this hour-long satsang together. Yes, Nick, please break the ice.
So I've just been reading more about akasha and prana, and I'm just wondering how that relates to Prakriti, if it's the same as Prakriti or if it's just a function of Prakriti.
Under the overall heading of Prakriti in the Samkhya system of Lord Kapila, Purusha and Prakriti, of course, are at the very head of all 24 cosmic principles, Purusha itself being independent, of course. But you would not find prana included in that list, which is sort of puzzling to people who study Samkhya Yoga. But I think it's just so heavily inferred. In fact, in olden days, in those ancient times, they didn't draw a huge distinction between Brahman and prana, except when it was specified, they had to say that, of course, Brahman didn't move and prana does move. So there's one distinct difference. Prana flows and Brahman is all pervasive. But the psychic prana and the prana that's extremely sattvic, that is at the level of the Trinity, is an all-pervasive prana. So it really acts much like Brahman, simulates it, as it were. And so at that high level where everything is still and peaceful and unified, then it's hardly noticeable. So it might be from that standpoint that you don't see prana included in the various lists of tattvas. We know that that Father of Yoga provided for it very nicely, and we also know that in this day and age, the expression one prana in 5 forms has been given out by Swami Vivekananda, so that even there, the clue that we're given is to the inseparable nature of all these energies that are going in different directions. Out here on the physical level, of course, with the in-breath and the out-breath and the digesting of food and the flowing of fluids in the body and so forth, those are the outer forms of prana, 5 forms of them in one prana. So what you said is actually pretty well expressed. You'd say prana was more of a function of Prakriti. And we'd have to know also that Prakriti is both manifest and unmanifest. So it comes out of a formless state, just like we do, that is, like the soul does. So one side of that formless state is sentient and the other side is insentient, and prana carries them both. So prana holds a very high function in both the sentient and the insentient sides of existence. Here in Hawaii, we're called the prana ohana, because all of us are Westerners who are serious about gathering together our prana and living a divine life in a world that's letting it scatter. When the mind gets scattered, which is usually the problem that's pointed to, and you know the prana is already scattered. So the two, what to speak of Mahaprakriti or Prakriti having prana under its control, and facilitates various things with it, a more immediate connection can be made between prana and the mind and the thinking process, the psychic prana, as Vivekananda had called it. So in that way, then, we try and gather together our forces. When the outer world is trying to gather together forces for wars and for various other uses, the devotees of Divine Mother are trying to gather together their prana and focus it in the heart and in the mind, as Sri Krishna advises in the Bhagavad Gita.
Babaji, namaste.
Yes, namaste.
Namaste. I have a question in regards to what you were talking about. How is it that most holy places are found in more recluded places, like for say your own ashram, the Badranath? That I would think that these more silent places, their prana is more clean, more helpful for spiritual practices, if it has any relation with the prana. And also having Hawaii having these sources for good prana sources, that how can it be utilized for spiritual life?
Yes, generally that's true. That we're thinking of ourselves as the prana ohana here in Hawaii is another connection to be made. Sri Krishna also advises to seek out sequestered places in the Gita, far from the company of worldly men and women and from the activities that are going on. There's definitely a lot of prana in cities, no doubt. It's of the bustling variety, you might say, and more rajasically inclined. So when one wants to move towards sattva, or things that are conducive to peace of mind, then one will usually retire into refuges and remote pilgrimage places and mountain forest ashrams. In the ancient Vedic time, they talked about 4 different kinds of ashrams in that way. There were forest ashrams, there were mountain ashrams, and there were ocean ashrams. So holy beings who were realized would go to a particular place, and then people would just start to gather naturally around them. It could even happen in village ashrams. But basically, wherever a holy person went to sit for meditation and be silent, then it wouldn't be long before those of like mind would gather around him or her. And Sri Ramakrishna said in his day that when the lotus blooms in the woods, the bees will come of their own accord. They don't need an invitation. So in that way, anyone who seeks peace and gains it to any extent attracts to themselves other people of like mind who are seeking peace and depth. And so in that way, we could draw a correlation to the last question, in the sense that prana has been fully controlled and focused on the interior of consciousness. The exterior of consciousness just needs watching, observing, to learn the lessons from it that go by and changing phenomena and so forth. And then the internal mind, internal consciousness is mostly made of mind, because beyond external and internal, as the Upanishads state, is the transcendental. So that's where prana rests in its nest like a hawk, scriptures say. And then when it comes out again in the morning and flies, then everything begins to get activated, everything moves, and everything is growing again and going through the illusion of growth and so forth. So that prana is found mostly in the peaceful vibrations of great souls. And it's one of the things that we probably don't realize, that when we go there, we're maybe thinking that we're sitting in the light of illumination and so forth. But it could just be externally that we're just sitting in a pool of controlled and focused prana. And maybe the light of illumination, we still have to dive deeper to get that with an illumined soul, like spend time in our teacher's ashram over weeks and months, or repeated visits, until something more than just controlled prana, which is marvelous enough, begins to suggest itself to us. Because that's one of the problems. I've been citing it in one of my God blogs, which we'll begin studying next week together. All of you, those of you who are on the membership site, will do an hour study of the God blogs that I'm putting out, which are little Brahman bites of Dharma that are put together in just a few paragraphs that then make it easy to take apart and dive deep into, to do our manana around. So some of those teachings in the God blogs are around that principle of people coming to holy places or to holy beings and just having a darshan and going away. And that's it. Maybe they'll come back again soon, which could be okay for lighting your torch once in a while. But for keeping it lit, we feel that you have to spend long periods of time around a teacher, a guru, an acharya, a preceptor, a roshi, a tulku, a rinpoche, a swami. Spend a long time around them without break, hopefully, so that you begin to imbibe something deeper than just focused prana. The actual consciousness itself begins to transmit itself to you. And since it's inside of you anyway, and it's just more obscured than it is in a holy being, it's the same consciousness in both, then you need to spend time for that obscuring power to get to be reduced. And so you can then more easily see through the phenomena and the Maya that's perplexing you when you go back to the world. The green scum that comes dancing back over everything once goes away when you're in the presence of someone with hands who can part it, but comes back when you go away from that source. And it's a puzzling thing for people, and maybe getting a clue is not an easy thing to do either. But pretty soon, the wiser, more intelligent beings say, why is it that when I'm in that ashram or with that teacher that I feel like all my problems went away, but as soon as I go away, they come dancing back. So it's not possible probably to spend your whole life around a guru. It's very given to very few to do that due to various conditions, not just social and so forth, but also the march of life and death and so forth. But when you are able to spend more time with them, then the vibration of life gets more pure. The prana becomes more purified, and you too can then be a master of prana, gunas, and some of those cosmic principles that are somehow avoiding us in our attempt to bring them under our control. That's why Holy Mother said that it'd be good if you can live near your guru for a long period of time, because not always possible to live with him or her every day at an ashram or at a particular place, especially for the householders who have responsibilities and duties to do, which is a part of, if it's done wisely, a part of destroying karmas, neutralizing karmas. It's all too easy to think that your karmas are gone when you're in the presence of a holy person. But then when you go back in the world and test it, then you see that those things come dancing back and you weren't as masterful as you thought you were. So all of that is, of course, on levels of vibration or loss thereof or lack thereof, when the vibration becomes so pure and so fine that a person can just sit still for 12 days and 12 nights or for 49 days under a tree or whatever, and just take a huge deep dive and a deep draught of the waters of peace dwelling in the soul. Short of Brahman consciousness, you should be able to drink peace, drink in peace all the time, every day. Brahman consciousness will come, Brahma Samadhi will come later, but everything is based on that peace of mind, as Holy Mother said. You need that first and foremost, then everything else will follow after that. But just a few moments of peace or a little bit of peace in daily meditation or sort of touching in with things is not going to be enough to convince the soul 100% that it's one with Brahman. That feeling of two-ness and the unease that comes when you feel different from the source will come back and cause a kind of dis-ease. You're not at ease anymore, you have dis-ease. So first you can practice that with a object, with a pratika, and then with your worship, and finally you can practice it with a guru if you have one, and in the end you're going to have to practice it with your own self, as when the self realizes its own self. The self is master, the higher self is master of the lower self, Lord Buddha said. Who else would the master be? So in my meditation this morning, I was actually thinking of that beautiful phrase of the Lord Buddha and how he would have called that pragyaparam, supreme intelligence, and that's the same to us as Paramatman, the supreme self. There's the indivisible self, and then there's the individual self. And when those two are brought together, then the ego ripens, and that sense of peace pervades everything, and one begins to feel in a state of oneness or not two-ness all the time. Then it's too much trouble to raise and lower your eyelids, as the Avatut says. Just want to, like Sri Ramakrishna said, just eyes half open, eyes half closed. You're in Vishnu yoga all the time. Or sometimes you'll shut your eyes completely and be in Shiva yoga, dissolve everything. And we know that that's not possible for a restless person or for ordinary people. They close their eyes and they see all sorts of monstrosities, a bunch of garbage in their mind all the time, as Sri Ramakrishna said. But for a person who's attained that level of mastery, then they close their eyes and they just see peace, peace, peace everywhere.
Babaji, I'm sorry. I didn't have myself on mute. Was there any... I'll just mute myself because I have some sounds from around. I don't know how bothering it is.
Any other questions coming from our group today? So remember, and remember this also for next week when we'll have this satsang at 8 Hawaii time, and then we'll have an hour's break, and then we'll come back for a free members only God blogs discussion. And so there are homeworks for this kind of thing. So when you think, oh, I'm just going to satsang, it's going to be easy, I can just sit there and listen to him talk. But you can do that at class for 3 hours and you don't have to ask any questions. But for satsang, it's a participatory thing, and you can help the group and yourself both by asking questions that you don't know the answer to, or you're not sure of, or maybe you already know the answer, but you want to hear more elucidation on it, because Dharma is that way. You can never really conclude it, and truth is that way as well.
I have a question. In our last Gita class, we were talking about the fivefold strata of sacrifice, and I've been contemplating the Pitra Yagya and trying to find the balance or the distinction between, on the one hand, we're Brahmin, or we're far beyond any kind of family atmosphere or ancestral influence, and at the same time, they're very much a part of it, a part of us. So where does one begin and the other end? You know, there's the relative and there's the absolute. In the relative world, the ancestors definitely are ever present, and yet we're not. We're not the ancestors.
Well, yeah, I can be a little dharmically cheeky here by saying that there is no beginning or end to it. But there is getting off the wheel of birth and death. And the ancestors' realm is known for that problem. It's a problem from the standpoint of people wanting freedom from all sorts of vagaries and vicissitudes and changes. It's not a problem from the standpoint of a person who is still attached to the world and thinks that he can fulfill his desires there. The real crux of the situation comes when the soul finally realizes that only itself can fulfill its own desires, that everything is within oneself. And when you're seeking it outward, it's kind of a conundrum you've put yourself in, to think that you've already got everything. You need to project it out there in order to experience it, enjoy it, and then somehow that's going to fulfill you. Well, that's true in the long view. That is, if a person wants to follow the path of prana mukti, that is, if they're satisfied just with going from lifetime to lifetime and gaining a little bit of who they already are back to them, you see, and everything that you're gaining back is of your own doing and of your own nature. You can't get anything from Maya, and Maya goes on and on end without end, and everyone uses Maya from the avatar down to the ant, because Maya is just name and form and time and space, and so at different levels everyone's entering into that that world bewitching Maya that causes beings to believe in things like bodies and egos and separations and things to be gained, growth. There's a whole list of things which are transformations, but Brahman is always without transformation, a parinama compared to parinama. So when the soul finally realizes that, however many lifetimes it might take on the ancestor wheel, then it will get off that wheel by hook or by crook. That is, by wisdom and by meditation. And it will free itself from that, from ever having to be born there in ignorance again. So the great seers like Swami Vivekananda, for instance, did tell us that we could be born again, if we could do so in full consciousness. And so when you look into the scriptures for that, the secret is that you're not really being born at all, and you're not dying because you're not the body, and you're 100% certain that you're not the body. But the ancestors aren't certain of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming back and taking bodies in ignorance all the time and dying in ignorance and allowing themselves to be hypnotized by Maya over and over and over again. A ship of fools, this world floating through space. So that's why if you check into Holy Mother's teachings, for instance, which we will at the retreat in a few weeks here in Hawaii, I hope many of you are still trying to get your flights and come to that. Well, Holy Mother said to one person one day that, oh, the world is a place of suffering. May you never have to be born here again. And then she was heard to say at another time to another person, what does a man of knowledge fear of rebirth? So at one point you might think she's saying, well, get off the ancestor wheel and so forth. And of course she probably is, because you can be born without being a part of the ancestors. That is, without being under their influence. So we go hand in hand to the goal, all of us, and we try and take those who are willing by the hand to go with us. Those who are not willing, then we have to part company with them for the time being, as it is. It's not like you can ever separate out the soul. It's always one soul, and indivisible, indestructible, and so forth. Krishna calls it so many beautiful things in the Gita. But we can get out from under the influence of certain groups of beings. By the hundreds and thousands, they're influencing different levels of existence. From the Muladhara to the Sahasrara. This morning my chant was Om Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddha, Agya, Sahasrara. All 7 chakras and all the billions and billions of worlds and beings that exist in between those two. So from the Muladhara all the way up to the Sahasrara, there are hundreds and billions of souls or beings that exist in a sort of sense of feigned separation, as if they're individual beings when they're, of course, only part of the whole. All souls belong to Ishvara in that sense, and Ishvara is the whole, Vivekananda said. So it's the central pole, as mentioned in the Keno Upanishad, the central pole of light around which everything else is rotating or orbiting. That's right in the heart, the inner ruler controller, the Antaryami, right in the heart. And all other beings are orbiting around it like planets and suns of different kinds and sizes. So when the soul realizes its connection to that, then it can lift itself up off of the influences of beings who are still laboring under the idea that the ancestor realm and Burloka and Burvarloka have something to offer them. I was writing a God blog yesterday, and I called it Atlas Shrugged. Atman didn't. See, so the problem with the Westerner is he believes in Atlas. You see, he believes in the great soul holding up the world and being a hero and things having to fight against evil and changes and wars and all that. Atman doesn't believe in that at all. Atman never moves. So when you give up your preoccupation with the Western way of thinking, and you start to think more like the ancient rishis did, the Far East, then you take on a whole different idea of what truth is. It doesn't change. There's no movement in it. There's no action in it. There's no desire and fulfilling of desire there. There's no meditator and space to meditate upon there. There's no separation. And when you become 100% convinced of that, and you begin to live under the pole star of that changeless Brahman, then all lives you take will be free of influence of any other level or loka or akasha or world, or including, of course, the ancestors, which is really the big one right there at the third chakra, the Manipura chakra, where being born is all the rage, and living a life is all the rage, and fearing death is all the rage. And so the soul has to get over that, shrug it off, if you want to say, pun intended, and get down to the business of just being. Get over this idea of becoming, and get down to the non-dual truth, which is just pure being. Sat Chit Ananda. Sat Chid Ananda, that is pure truth, existence. Sat Chid, pure consciousness, and Ananda, pure bliss, is how they describe that being and that state into which the soul introduces itself again, or reintroduces itself again, when what we call enlightenment dawns. All of life, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is for that, nothing else. Not for children, not for wives, not for money, not for lands, not for progeny, not for property, all the things that the ancestor realm is seeking again and again over time. And so I guess they never got fulfilled by it, right? Because they still go on seeking it for lifetimes. So it's about time to hands off and leave off of it and give it up and meditate peacefully inside of your own self. So I was walking with Saraswati there. You see her? Her and Nick are there in their new home. This is the first day you're spending in your new home, is it? Just a few miles down the road in Waimea, off of Mud Lane, of all things. So I was walking with Saraswati the other day in the garden, and she was helping me. And I looked at the mower and I said, that mower's not working right now. But it was working last week. But last week it was raining, so I couldn't mow. So what's that all about? 1 week the mower's working and it's sunny. Then it's raining and I can't mow. The next week the sun comes out and I can mow because the mower's fixed. So isn't that like Maya? She said, yeah, that means you should just give everything up. That was her simple answer that I heard from her. Everything's always at odds, and contrary to it, to itself. So then give it up and be peaceful and content. Content and bliss, content and peace have a connection leading to bliss. So try and court one or the other to get to the latter.
Babaji, I was interested in what you said about Kali Puja and the meditation and the mala that you were given by Lex. And I was just wondering, is there any more to that story that you'd like to share, or maybe just share about the meditation that you're going to do?
Oh, that's one of my deep secrets you're trying to get at there. I was in India, in Calcutta, and Lex and Sheila and their kids were with me. I had brought them to India for their first time. And we were all at Gold Park Institute. And they were in a big, large room on the first floor down by the office. And so I walked over one morning and it was Divine Mother holidays, holy days. And so I walked into the room and Lex was there in his lungi. He had like put on this Indian dress. It was all wrapped up in folds of cloth, sitting on his bed. And a mosquito net was up. He was there having a few fruits and things. So I walked in, I said, I want Kali mantra. I didn't mince any words. So he immediately looked at me and said Kali mantra. That was the only words we exchanged. So I got my Kali mantra from him in Calcutta there on Holy Mother Days at Gold Park Institute. With Swami Nitya Shrupananda 4 floors above me. So then I acquired this necklace of skulls. Not long after that, it's a mala made of bone that are all shaped in the shape of skulls. So I didn't know if I wanted to do very much of Kali mantra on that at all. I just wanted it. I was sticking to my Ramakrishna and Sharda mantra, and that's powerful enough. So then I decided I was going to do 108 repetitions of the Kali mantra that Lex gave me once a year on Kali Puja at midnight. So with that necklace of skulls made out of bone, given to me by a tantric practitioner, then I began to do that over time every year. So that's what we'll be doing tonight. And when I do it, I only do it 108 times a year. And so I do it very intensely and very slowly, not like I usually do my Holy Mother mantra or my Ramakrishna mantra, which is just regular paced usually. So I'll be doing it, taking a full hour to do 108 of those repetitions on each skull. So that I figure is for the highest good of the world. Like one person told Lex once, "Oh, I see you do the mala, 108. I do that too. I do 100 for myself and 8 for the world." And Lex turned and looked at him and said, "I do all 108 for the world." So the practice of the mala is very powerful. It comes from deep within. And when it comes out to the word, as we've been studying lately, the word, the letter, and the power of Shakti that's in each sound. And that comes out of the word Om, is the initial bijam or seed. Then when it takes form outside and it's uttered or muttered or even said aloud, then it purifies the atmosphere. And that's why Abhi and I just ask about ashrams and how they have a holy feeling to them. It's because mantra's been spoken into the air there for so long, for such a long period of time by people with pure minds, or at least focused minds.
Babaji, can I intersect with another question? Or not intersect, interject. It's a different thing.
Yes, please interject away.
So I've been doing my japa, and I've kind of came to know that that by chanting the mantra faster, sometimes it can be more effective, like because there's not a chance for you to deviate from your thoughts if you're doing it fast. Does it? Can you talk a little bit about, since you brought it up, that you used this mantra slowly, if there's a difference if you chant fast or slow from your standpoint?
Yes. Of course, there's a teaching in SRV that you don't want to intensify an impure mind. So people who jump to these very powerful austerities before their mind understands the Dharma or at least is balanced, then that can cause a lot of anomalies and strange uprisings in the mind. Premature is the good word for that. Like premature Kundalini awakening is based on that. They hear some great soul did some powerful austerities. They said, I think I'll do that. But they didn't know that great soul practiced all sorts of preparatory exercises and purifications up to the time when they finally attempted such an austerity. So with that as a kind of preface to your question, then it has its application here too, that beings who get the mantra, who are still pasu, you know what that word means? In Tantra, pasu means there's still animalistic tendencies in them. And the next level of human being is virya. This is a tantric teaching. Virya means more heroic. They're not looking out for themselves so much. They're looking out for others more. So selflessness comes to them. And of course, the highest level of being is divya or daiva, the divine beings who are already well practiced and adept and illumined. So pasu is that analytic level of soul, and we have to think that that's a teaching pertinent to spiritual beings, not just worldly beings, because worldly beings don't know what a mantra is and wouldn't seek it if over land and property and money, even if they did know what it was. So there must be spiritual people among us who are still animalistic. That is, they still have animalistic tendencies in them that they haven't controlled. So there you have a perfect use for the mantra, which is probably why swamis and tulkus and rinpoches and people come from Tibet and India and so forth to America, and they say, well, what will we do for these people here? I think mantra would be the best thing. So use this to purify your mind. It's really kind of a gentle austerity. It can have very, very deep, powerful ramifications, but this is my answer coming to you. This question is the point I'm trying to make, is that if people are doing mantra and they're restless, then they'll do it very fast. Somehow thinking in their minds, or maybe not thinking that much, that if the more they do, the better it will be for them, which, is probably not the case. It's just like, you should, slow down, buddy. But so then on another day, though, slow down could be a problem. To see like you're really lazy, you don't feel like meditating, and mantra practice becomes as hard as digging the dry earth with a spade, as Holy Mother says. So you're sitting there just dragging it along. But then in a balanced time, when everything is right with the world and sattva is upon you, the sattva guna is upon you, then you sit down and you're just saying at a moderate speed, and it just seems perfect. You're not worrying about whether it's too fast, too slow, too much, too little, and you just get the most out of the practice. So I would say, put your question in that context, that it might be a good meter to judge things by, sort of like the gunas. If you find yourself doing japa one day and it's going far too fast or too slow, but and there's always a but to every dharmic teaching. It's always an opposite side to everything. Is that if your mind is in sattva and you're doing an austere practice, you'll see monks doing the japa so fast that the beads are practically catching on fire. There's smoke coming off the beads, as it were. It's just going around so fast, you see. So it's not that they're trying to do more so that it will benefit them more. It's that they're so taken up with the vision of their ishtam inside of themselves that it's kind of a spiritual excitement that's going on, and they're just doing the mantra full speed ahead. However, on another occasion out in the forest under a tree with Jesus or with Buddha or with your teacher, you may just want to do one mantra every 15 seconds and just savor it. Sit with it, take it apart, try and think what it means. what each letter signifies. Bring back all the teachings associated with the triputis of the Bijam Om and other Bijams that we have, that you've been given, and just maybe like I'll do tonight at 11 to midnight, just probably take a couple minutes to do one recitation of Kali mantra and just think about it or let it settle. Think about it or not. Sometimes you can think about it and that's manana. Other times you can just let it echo in your mind, and like something sinking to the bottom of a lake and having a great effect in your mind. Deep peace can come from that slow repetition. Whatever the case, you breathe. Ramprasad's song says you have to breathe the presence of God into the mantra. The mantra holds it, no doubt, but you don't have the tools yet to go in and split the atom of the bijam yet. So you're still saying it outwardly and waiting for the effects. Then if you don't participate in your practice of mantra yourself and breathe life into it, then the practice is going to end. You'll get bored with it. So then in the earlier stages, then you should be watering it with the tears of your devotion, as Ramprasad Sen sings in his beautiful song. Water it with the tears of devotion. Irrigation for those seeds exists in your very heart and mind in the form of water of devotion. So he's talking about farming in the fields. Manre krishikashanana is, oh mind, when are you going to learn to seed the fertile field of your mind? Water for irrigation of the seed given to you by your guru exists there in your very heart. So beautiful songs and insights in India about how dear the relationship to God's name has become to the devotee.
Thank you, Babaji.
Isha, yes, you have a question.
Namaste, Babaji. Well, yeah, I was just reading last night that Sri Ramakrishna called the Kali Brahmamayi, the power of Brahman. Could you maybe elaborate on that explanation made by the great master?
Repeat that explanation again.
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question anyway. My question was basically that last night I read that Sri Ramakrishna called Kali Brahmamayi, the power of Brahman. Could you maybe elaborate on that for me?
Well, that's a wide subject, of course. It could take up a retreat, what to speak of a few minutes at satsang. But he had some very powerful names, and so do the scriptures have very powerful names for Divine Mother. It's sort of amazing that she's such a well-kept secret. You really don't hear a lot about Shakta sects and cults in India either. You hear so much about Vaishnavism and Shaivism, but the Shakta sects seem to be very quiet and participatory and there and present, but as if is her will that she be behind the scenes all the time. So Brahmamayi would be, the controller of Maya from the standpoint of where it all begins with Lord Brahma in the Trinity. And so she's the dynamic side of the static truth of Brahman. And this is why we study and try and memorize and commit to memory for all time, hopefully, the cosmic principles, because that gives us a handle on a hierarchy of things. Out here in the outer world, the hierarchy is just a bunch of governments, or hierarchy is people at work who have jobs that are bosses over, and so forth. There's hierarchies all around outside here, but nobody knows of this inner hierarchy except maybe just to throw a word at it like, oh God. So there's a whole strata, just like there's strata of various levels of Earth that an archaeologist would study. There's strata for the inner archaeologist too to study that consists of, for instance, everything leading up to your ancestors. You should probably know about your ancestors because, and hold them in regard, and even do sacrifice to them, so that when the time comes, they'll be appeased or pleased enough to let you pass, because the truth seeker, of course, is going to want to get beyond the limitations of the three chakras, three lower worlds. And of course, another word for Brahmamayi in that case would be Kundalini, that she's going to rise up with great power, because there's great power at the root chakras, like we know here. And this is basically, we're living at the root chakra, most people. Is an interesting way of putting it. This is Muladhara all around you. And it should be obvious to you, because people don't care for each other, and they hate each other, and they war against each other, and they cheat each other, and all of these things are going on, or they're just very insensitive and just don't care much. They don't have any regard. So even regard for ancestors in the West has lost ground. They're really not thinking so much about that as they are still in places like China and Japan, Tibet. So by taking stock of this power that's even here at the root chakra in this world, as we see so many amazing things here that are full of power, then you become aware of the dynamic power of Brahman. That's how our founder Lex Hixon would describe it: static and dynamic. So Sri Ramakrishna would say, everywhere I look out here, I see a combination of Shiva and Shakti. That is, he saw something stable and he saw something moving on top of it, like clouds moving across an immovable sky, or waves cropping up out of a one deep ocean. So there's always a stable principle, and then the active on top of it, causing waves, causing movement, and so forth. So he knew that even out here, everything was under the auspice of Shiva and Shakti. And so that's a very conscious person who could see that potential divinity and that double principle of Shiva and Shakti existing even here on the Burloka, that is on the world plane. So then a person like that would take stock of this ability of intelligence that allowed him or her to see through the appearances of things and think differently than other beings. Swami Vivekananda called this living intelligence. And he said it produces fire of yoga. And that's what he liked to live in, the fire of yoga, that would burn away everything that would even dare to get it in the way of his vision of Brahman, even here on earth. And we know everything's trying to get in the way of our vision of God here on earth. That's the obscuring power, Avarana Shakti. So then taking account of or becoming aware of this power outwardly would tend to have you look for its source. And when you look for its source, then you're beginning to do an inspection of the inner worlds that exist in your mind. Heaven is really in your mind. Kingdom of heaven is within you. So you begin to look in there and you see still this power pervading everything. You might say the root of that great pillar that the Kano Upanishad mentions, it's a pillar of light out around which everything's vibrating. So you're still down there at the root of it. Sometimes they call that the stalk of the lotus. That's, goes down into the water, and then the lotus has its roots buried in the mud. So this lotus of marvelous human awareness has its roots there in the earth, the mud of the earth, and then stalk comes up through like a spine, like a spinal column, comes up through various levels of existence, and then finally blooms as the lotus in the brain, the head, the mind, really. And what's sustaining that lotus? What causes it to exist? What's giving it its nutrients? What's causing it to bloom? All the symbologies are there in which you can trace the movement of this obscure mother force, who, whether you call her Brahmakara Vrittijan, or whether you call her Chaitanya Swarupa, or whether you call her Brahmamayi, or whether you call her Kundalini Shakti, is this one dynamic power that, to go back to an earlier question, is even in charge of all the 5 forms of prana, and the psychic prana too, that moves the mind. She'll give the great souls their highest thoughts, their highest philosophical thoughts. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, one ray from the sun of mother's wisdom stuns 1,000 scholars. So at all level, she's causing insights. Some of them, black hole, so what? It's all physical. Why are you so hypnotized by it? But the deeper ones are not so ho-hum. They're much more exhilarating and cause the soul to begin to look at the source of all things, maybe even itself as being the source. The great self is the master of the small self. Who else would the self be, Buddha said. So you're looking towards all that is your very own, as Holy Mother would put it. It's all your very own. So when you're practicing neti neti, Brahmamayi appears to you in such a form that causes you to say, not this, not this. But if you're practicing, if you've finished that phase and you begin to see that everything is really your own manifestation, it's come out of your own thinking process, and deeper than that, out of your own heart, then you're seeing this practice of iti iti consummates itself, and everything belongs to you. So at neti neti, you're saying, the 6 passions, the 5 elements, so forth and so on. None of these belong to you. None of this is your own. The world is not your own. But then at the iti iti level, you're saying all of this is my own. It's my very own. It's my very dear. All beings are dear. The 5 elements are dear, even with their imperfections. Everything is priya. Priya moda pramoda. First it's dear, and I want to go get it, and then I acquire it, and then I consider it most dear to myself. So this is good to be talking about on Kali Puja Day today. And Brahmamayi, another favorite word of Sri Ramakrishna for the Divine Mother. He saw her in so many aspects, so it'd be hard to choose a word that maybe was his favorite, but the last thing he said was Kali, Ma, Ma, Ma. So from the simple to the most profound, she's inundating everything and permeating it all at all levels. The most notable sign of her presence is intelligence. It's gone missing in a lot of people. But where it's present, that especially that higher intelligence, then you find all the marvels of existence coming back to you, and all the states of higher consciousness with them. And that's how we saw Sri Ramakrishna living day to day. So remember next week then, as we close this satsang, that next week we'll have a satsang at the same time, then an hour's break while we have our breakfast, our prasad meal, and then come back for a study of the Brahman bites, the God blogs I'm calling them. Then your homework for that is to go up on the site and read them. They'll probably take you all of 5 minutes each. And I've probably put about a dozen up there, and I've got 2 dozen more that I'm going to release over time. So they're a really good quick study for people on the go, on the run. It's just to open it up, read one, take it somewhere, think about it. And then we can expand on it in this hour together. The idea came to me from last week's satsang, because it went 2 hours last week because people came late. And all of a sudden we were sitting there having really good conversations with each other, very deep, for an extra hour. So I think we can continue on in that fresh tradition, and also encourage everyone to spend more time on that website, because it's just like Mother Wisdom is there in that website, and you can read it and contemplate it in the peace and quiet of your own home, and then we can talk about it. So that'll be next Saturday, and tomorrow is a class, second class on separating the wheat from the chaff. That is a sort of discrimination, viveka and vairagya, as a tool to cut through things like we're talking about today. It'd be that intelligence that we have. We're bringing it out, sharpening it up like a sword, honing it, and going to battle with everything that's in our way, that's keeping us from realizing our own true self and living in peace and contentment and bliss. So we'll have a second installment of that class tomorrow here at Butternut. So I bid adieu to all of you then, to all parts of the world. And we will gather again soon and keep this up. And in this difficult time where there's COVID, there's also Paravid. So we tend to lean towards that, and that'll guide us through all periods of problems and that spring out of the phenomena of Maya. And we'll just end up right back in our nest, as like the crow Bashundi. Bashundi made Ram angry, and so he went to all different worlds to escape Ram's wrath. Finally, Ram caught him, of course, and grabbed him and put him in his mouth. And Bashundi thought, oh, it's all over, it's all over. But then he just woke up back in his own nest. So that's what we will all do when we finally allow Ram to catch up with us in the form of our own Atman, and realize that we're always in one place, one indivisible place at all times, and that all movement is sort of a dream movement away from that, and that source, and that we always come back to that source. So I leave you with those words here on Kali Puja, and salute the Divine Mother of the Universe.
Thank you, Babaji.